Hey everyone, it's Rick. Welcome back to the Sound Horizons podcast, brought to you by D.R.U.G.S. And today we are, how do I explain? I wish I could tell you that one of these times during the podcast, I was just going to bring some sort of average or ordinary guest on, but that's just not how we roll here. That's not what we do. We only bring you the coolest people from the music industry. It's just that simple. There's a lot of people in the music industry, and I'm not saying if they're not on the podcast, they're not cool. But at the same time, I'm probably saying if they're not on the podcast, they're not as cool. I'm just saying it. I can hear you clicking furiously now, and your disgust and anger with me gives me purpose and meaning. So thank you. Thank you. Today's guest is no stranger to everything that you love and know when it comes to music and the music world. He is arguably one of the coolest human beings you're ever going to get the chance to listen to, talk about, and hear about. So I'm not going to waste any more of your time. Although I know from the comments prior to this, the longer I drag this part out, the more angry you get. And again, there's a weird component of my life where I kind of dig that. I kind of dig that you're all just waiting for me to get to it, and I'm just not going along with the program. But anyway, I want to talk to him. You want to hear me talk to him. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your friend and mine, John Feldmann. Dun, dun, dun.
Here we are.
John's here. And
I'm here.
Here's the first question I have to ask, because I believe you are an innovator in many ways, but one of the things you are an early adopter of is a vegan lifestyle. Is that correct? That
is correct. Yes.
You've been a vegan long before it was cool and trendy and even easy to be a vegan. I mean, you've been a vegan since it was a little more complicated to be a vegan.
I was vegan in Poland in 1998, and that was rough, dude.
Ooh.
That was really, really rough. It was like, they're like, well, chickens are vegan and fish is vegan. And I'm like, well, not really, that's not really the truth. And in Japan, all I ate in Japan back in 2002 was, I had a diet of cashews and bananas. I ate cashews and bananas for 10 days straight. That was it. So it was rough back in the day. Now it's like every corner there's a vegan restaurant.
Well, I was going to say, it's very similar to the music industry, right? I mean, you have this thing that's pure, you have this thing that happens, and then ultimately over time, whether it's a genre or a trend, it becomes really, really popular. And what started out as something innovative and not for everybody then is like as easy as it can get. So it's kind of, I find those two parallels incredibly interesting, because veganism is also, any health choice you make in your life is also one of those cumulative things that you really are grateful the longer you do it, and the older you get and the more you move through the journey, the effects of that become much more apparent. Are you, as you look back on that journey of being a vegan at your point in time in your life now, health-wise, are you quantifiably seeing the good stuff from those choices you've made? Has it all been worth it?
I mean, look, ultimately it's about the animals for me. It's about animal welfare and the way they're treated in factory farms, and I don't buy into that. And I feel like that's my primary purpose when it comes to animal rights, is the way that they're treated before they die is inexcusable. And I've got my dogs, I've got we have our life out here, and it's a good life for sure.
I love it. Okay. I needed to address that. I'm always really excited when anyone in our industry has a very public, health conscious choice they've made, regardless of what the impetus is. I find that there are so many horrible decisions you can make for your health, both mentally and physically in our industry, that when you find someone so outspoken as you are, that's kind of great to get that side of the coin, because I don't think we see it enough. So
look, right. I love my life because I say so. I mean, that's really, it's like, I'm not so smart where I can't trick my brain into feeling something different than I actually do. It's like when I was going through one of the hardest points in my life, not to jump right in, but it was like, yes, there was a moment that, I could feel the world at my fingertips, like top of the game, crushing it at every level, like working with Tom Wally at Warner Brothers as an A&R guy. Like we had platinum records with Story of the Year, with the D.R.U.G.S first 2 albums, and I'm getting offers, to produce My Chemical Romance and the Deftones, and like my life was just, I didn't have enough time in the day. Goldfinger was selling out theater amphitheaters. We were like just crushing it. But it's like sometimes you don't know when you're, out the top. It was like you don't know that that's it. And it's not like I haven't gotten back there or I haven't had other moments, but man, that point in my life was so huge. And when it went away, and it was funny because I actually worked with Sonny, who became Skrillex after From First to Last. He came into my studio. We made an EP called Sonny and the Blood Monkeys where he was singing, but it was all drum and it was all, dubstep and
Sure.
what he ended up becoming. There, my dog just got back from the walk. She's very happy. And it's like, and all of a sudden everything became dance based, Swedish House Mafia. It just became more electronic music based, and rock music definitely went away for a minute. And my manager at the time was like, dude, you should become DJ Feldmann or whatever the fuck he was thinking. There was a moment where he thought that I should really dive into that. And it's like, I know what I know. I know how to write a song. I know how to play guitar, kind of, and I know how to sing. I know how to write a lyric. And it's like I was lost. Like for a moment, I was really lost on what is my career. I had 2 young kids. I had a wife who I was supporting. Tom Wally lost his job at Warner Brothers, and it was like we had to move from my studio house in the hills to the dreaded valley. And it's like my friend told me, he's like, "You're moving to the valley? That's where dreams go to die." And I'm like, what the fuck, dude? Thanks for helping. And then I talked to my other friend. He's like, and my other friend goes, "It's always darkest right before it turns pitch black," right? It was like this whole thing of people just, really, I don't know if they were helping, but they were trying to help. But it was like, I started saying, I love my life. I just started saying it. My friend said, dude, I don't care if you're suicidal or homicidal or what's going on in your career. I want you to say it out loud. And I started doing that. And that was the first thing for my mental health that I did that got me out of this hole that I was in when I didn't know what my career looked like. I didn't know what the future looked like, and all of a sudden 5 Seconds of Summer came along, and it was like this, kind of pop rock band, reinvigorated everything for me. But I didn't know that was going to happen. So it's like when you talk about like your wellness and your healthy lifestyle, for me, I have a 40-degree cold plunge, and that changes my mental really quick. Oh. All I want to do is get out. When I get in that thing, I'm like, when am I getting out? Because it's so cold. But I sit there for 3 minutes and I breathe. I just breathe in and out. I breathe in God, I breathe out self. That's what I do for 3 minutes. I get up, I work out, I say my little prayers to the universe or whatever the fuck God is. I have no idea. I say my prayers and I eat healthy and I take my dogs for a hike, and then I get to live the best life I can, and I drink a lot of fucking coffee.
Preach. And that was it, folks. No, I'm just kidding. But in those moments, so you tackled so many amazing things there. The one thing that I think everybody relates to, and again, Duck, Here Comes Some Love. It's a part of it. I mean, your production, songwriting, your imprint on the rock and certain genres of rock from the late 90s into the mid to early 2000s is indelible. It's undeniable. And I know from our literal interactions, it's not like you had a master plan when you were 12. One day, I'm going to be the go-to guy. These things just happen as a result of your passion and your love. Now you start in this punk rock ethos, right? You're in Goldfinger, you're doing this thing. I've got to ask the $55,000 question. How many different times in your career, once things started picking up, did people accuse you of not being punk rock anymore?
Well, that's a great question. Like, I mean, there were these magazines when I was growing up, Maximum Rock and Roll and Flip Side in the Bay Area, that I would I would read as a kid, because I definitely, I mean, if I was, look, I'm 57. How punk rock can you be at 57? And, I would never be the producer that I am today. I would never be the human that I am, the man that I love. Like, I can look at myself in the mirror and say, I love you, John, which there was a point in my life where I couldn't do that. I didn't have the kind of self-care program that I just shared about that I have today. But yeah, I mean, look, I started in a punk band called Family Crisis, and I really feel lucky that I at 12 I did know I wanted to be a musician. I didn't know I wanted to be a producer, but I wanted to be a professional musician. And back then, all the bands that I listened to, the Adolescents, TSOL, Social Distortion, and all the Southern California punk bands, Circle Jerks. None of those bands were really making a living. Black Flag, they were all just in a band, basically living on what they made at the show and having this, the lifestyle of, and that's all I wanted. I just wanted to not have to go to school, not have to work a day job and play music. But unfortunately, like those punk shows back then, I went to a lot of them. I mean, I saw the Dead Kennedys. I mean, it was like, there were no girls at these shows, none. It was like maybe 2 out of, 600-700 people or less. And it's like, I had urges as a teenage boy that I'm like, dude, I gotta. And so, I found the Police. I found the Police. I found Duran Duran. I found the Blondie. I found New Wave. I found the Specials. I found Madness. I found all these new wave bands that definitely took me out of this. I mean, I was like, I was a do-it-yourself punk rock kid, but unlike Fat Mike, who's my friend, who stayed the course, if I started playing in my band, I don't know what year it was when I was 12 or 13, but 77, 80, probably like 82, 83, I was in Family Crisis. I didn't stay that course. And it's like, there is a real value to what Fat Mike has done with No Effects since they started. I mean, he really stayed the course, and then they just sold out 20,000 people their last show in San Pedro. That's not my story. My story is I discovered all this other music. Then I discovered Queen and the Beatles, and I just became a fan of songwriting. What does that look like? I started in another band that was like more infectious grooves, suicidal tendencies, called the Electric Love Hogs, and we weren't a punk band. We were, we were like a thrash metal band. And it's like, I fucking love Pantera. I love Metallica. And kind of without those influences, I would have never been able to produce D.R.U.G.S. It would have never happened. And so, yeah, I mean, I remember Flipside wrote some article about me when it started Goldfinger that, he was in a metal band and Sell Out and all that bullshit. And it's like, look, I get it. My story just isn't that of being this punk rock kid, consistently for 57 years. I've had, and I love punk rock. It changed and shaped my life like no other music. Social Distortion, as a songwriter, the way I perform on stage, punk rock changed my life. But that's not only who I am. Thank God. But because of that, I have like, pop punk is in my bones. The Buzzcocks, Generation X, all those bands, all those British rock bands, the Jam, they are in my bones. I wouldn't have been able to produce Blink-182 if it wasn't for that history in my life. So I have no shame, whatever people want to say, about like, that's purist mentality. Like I don't believe in that. I just don't believe in that. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, it totally does. And I think you bring up a great point. And I again, as you're listing off these bands, you brought up TSOL, which is this amazing band, again, that I loved as a kid. But I swear there was just a window of time where that band only existed so other bands could wear their shirt in MTV music videos in the late 80s. It's like no one you talk to knows who TSOL is, but they know they've seen the logo or that one particular shirt with it's like, yeah. So...
Well, my history, it's like I've been, I've gone full circle so many times that like I've become friends with a lot of these people that like I used to worship as a kid. Like Jack Grisham is one of my friends, the singer of TSOL. And look, I mean, even if you take that band specifically, like they went through a new wave phase. Beneath the Shadows, like had all these keyboards and so it's not like everybody, stays true to the sound forever. And thank God that's the case, because I mean, how could I, as a fan of music, be true to myself and to say, I've got to deny that these other artists exist, and it doesn't hit me. Like, look, George Michael is for me, one of the greatest songwriters of all time. And I don't think there's a band that you could say less punk than Wham. I think they're probably the least punk band of all time, but yet I love the songwriting.
Oh, well, that's a great point. So let me you talk about songwriter, and you're also, I mean, again, you wear all these hats. We're not going to get to all of them because it's like that'd be a 7-hour podcast. So what I want to talk to you about misconceptions people might have. So a young artist comes to you sort of they want to work. They say, "Hey, it's John Feldmann. What's the number one artist in your experience that you've worked with that other people try to make them sound like?" Do they come in and say, "Well, I want the used snare drum and the guitar tone from," and so what is the one band where it's like every time someone new gets like, "Can you make me sound like," that you've worked with?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, I mean, The Used is the band that put me on the map as a producer. I mean, I had produced Showoff and Mest prior. I produced my own band. I produced a couple local bands, but they were the band that, like, I really dug into the sonics of, like, the engineering aspect of making records. I really dug in on that. You know, when I made my first record with Showoff, I did it on 2-inch tape, and I was going to buy this 2-inch tape machine from, my friend Chris, and then I got a computer, and this was like 99, 98. So sound designer, early versions of Pro Tools. And I could just manipulate the sound so much cleaner and better in digital than I could on analog. And I knew that it was the future. I could tell it was the future. And it was back then, most people were still making records on tape. And so I got this computer and I started making records on Pro Tools with Mest as the first record I made in Pro Tools. But
wow.
I mean, to answer your question, I mean, the Used first album, like, they want that drum sound, they want the vocal sound. I had a C12, this AKG C12 I used on vocals, this old vintage mic that's just so pristine. It sounded so good with Bert's vocals. You know, I had a Blue Stripe 1176 and a 1073, the Neve 1073, and that was my chain. And it was like, that's what people wanted for their vocals, you know, which is a pretty basic vocal chain. It's not like I was really reinventing the wheel, but, you know, I'd say that first Used record is the one that most people, but, I mean, the Bleak album, California, people, you know, the drum sounds, I mean, it's kind of like when you have a singer like Bert that sounds like nobody else, like he can scream. I mean, with all of his body, it's like he'll throw up. He's screaming so hard, and he can sing like that Michael Jackson pristine pop vocal. It's like you're sometimes trying to capture the artist rather than the engineering aspect of it. Same with Travis Barker, who is arguably the greatest drummer of all time. You know, when you hear his drum sounds, it's the player most of the time rather than the microphones I'm using. But look, it's all important. Song is king. Song is the most important thing. But I also think the hi-hat sound is also the most important thing, and the kick drum sound and the guitar tones. It's like everything matters, everything. But yeah, to answer your question, the self-titled Used record.
So when you talk about your production style, one of the things that I've always loved about all of your records across all of the different genres and all of the different versions of rock is all of your records, in my opinion, as a humble fan, have this really cool use of space and clarity. There are a lot of things that could happen in many of these records. They're dense productions, huge guitars, big drums, very identifiable vocalists, but somehow through the process of production and songwriting and arranging, you always seem to manage to keep enough space in these songs to make them more than some people might think they would ever be. And I'm curious if that's a conscious decision or if that's just a byproduct of you really being so into the songwriting process that when you're writing that sort of kind of works itself out because you're like, you know what, there's too much going on here. It is amazing to have as layered these productions as you do, but still have so much room and clarity. So I was wondering if you could speak to that from your perspective.
Yeah, look, when I started, I'm not an educated sound designer. I didn't go to school for sound design. I'm self-taught. And so I didn't know, you know, what a 12K shelf was, or, you know, I didn't know anything. I literally, like, would bring up a Focusrite EQ, and I would have a vocal take from Tony from Mest, and I would just, put the EQ up to, 1K and just kind of move around. And what does this sound like? And what does this sound like on what instrument? Like on a kick drum, on a snare drum. And I would just figure out what an EQ does. I figure out what a compressor does just by turning the knobs, by turning the input, making the threshold shorter, quicker, whatever it is, or slower. And I would just get in there and tweak until I kind of figured out what I liked. And then I tried to figure out, like, how do I not have the overhead mics fight with the vocal or the guitar, like that upper echelon of top end sounding instruments fighting with each other. And so I'd find different frequencies that each instrument could hold their space in. But a lot of this question is like, it just, a lot of coffee and tweaking, just tweaking in the studio for hours. I mean, I would stay up. I mean, those first records, I would work 20-hour days because the band would last about 10 to 12 hours. Then I'd spend the next 8 hours just by myself going, I got to make these guys sound, better than their demo, better than they expect, better than whatever's on the radio. Like, I just needed to push myself to be the best producer I could be. And that just took time and tweaking. And I would sit there, and this is before Splice, so I would just sit there with, Reason or Omnisphere or, Expand. And I would just look for different sounds, like what is a harmonium? And when I was making that Panic at the Disco record, Vices and Virtues, like we would just sit there, Brendan and I would sit there for hours, just like, what's the best Celeste sound we could get, and because we were making a record back then, we'd have a bit of a budget. So we'd have 6 months to spend together. We would just sit there and just find sound after sound of, a glockenspiel or like the best pizzicato string sound. And now I've got Abbey Road strings and we've got Splice. So it's a lot easier to kind of get to the finish line than it used to be, but it just took time. And I feel like the best records I make today still take time. Like, I still spend the time to figure out what's going to make this unique, rather than the same guitar tone or the same bass guitar. Like, I try and mix it up, and every artist obviously is going to be treated differently. I can't just have a blueprint of what it is, but I do know that the Sony C800 has been used a lot the last few sessions with Ian Dior and with Lil Sky, because they're both rappers. But yeah, it's experimentation now.
Do you find, because you started this journey on this side of the glass, when you still kind of, like you had mentioned, had the best of both worlds, the analog and the digital world, but then we've moved over to the digital world. That's where everything happens now. Do you find that you've got too many options for someone with your attention span or your energy, or do you narrow your options down? I mean, you can limit, you could, like you said, you could work for days now and change sounds incrementally to the point where you could never walk away from your computer if you didn't want to. So you're clearly a workaholic. How do you manage it?
You ever seen that meme with all the senior citizens and on the slot machines, and it's like, producer looking for snare sound?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's an unlimited supply of snare samples you can find out there, or clap or snap samples or kick drums or whatever. So it's kind of like, for me these days, I'm focusing on song structure, arrangement, lyric, melody, and performance. Those are the things I'm focused on the most. I've got a team of 4 guys that, we work. I mean, like you said, I am a workaholic and I love what I do. So it never really, once in a while, I'll come across an artist that, is and the overthinking challenging, where we'll have like 8 hours into a song and they'll be like, I don't like it. Let's start over. And it's like, dude, why didn't you say this hour one? Or they'll be like, what if I sang in a British accent? And I'm like, dude, why are you just singing your own accent? Or why don't, you know what I mean? Like, why don't we try a reggae style? And like, cause you're not a reggae band, ultimately those things get challenging. But, I mean, what I do as far as like going through and finding different samples, like I'll have references. There's this guy, I think his name's I don't know. My engineer just turned me on to him. He's a legend. And this new producer coming up, and it's just everything sounds like he's running it through a 4-man preserver in Little Ultra Boy. It's just everything is so lo-fi. It sounds so cool. And so we're just like, I'm like, I like that snare sound, or whatever, Jack Antonoff on the last 1975 record. Like, I really like how the overhead sound on this song. And so we'll find, we'll kind of do research on the internet to see how do we recreate that, or if if an artist says, I want my snare sound to sound like this, we'll find a sample that can kind of fit it, or we'll get the snare drum that they use, the Black Beauty or the Bell Brass or whatever. So it's sort of like there's always, I'm always trying to push the envelope of what that sonic landscape looks like, but I don't really, I'm not like looking, I'll go through maybe 10 to 20 and I'll be like, this'll do. And then my team will take it and I'll give them a reference, and they'll replace my clap with a different clap, or they'll EQ it differently or whatever. But like I said, I'm really focused on the song, hyper focused. I don't really work longer than 10-hour days anymore. It's like, I'm 57. I got kids. I've got a life outside of the studio. And it's like, I would burn out. I was burning out, the first probably 20 records I made, I was doing everything, moving the 57 around the cone of the cabinet. Like I was doing everything of the engineering, sound replacing, editing, tuning all vocals, and mixing everything myself. And it was like, I need an army these days, because it's like, we used to have fucking, $400,000 to make an album. Now we've got like $20,000-$30,000 sometimes to make an album. Yeah. So it's not like, and I got to pay my guys because they're amazing. And so we're trying to get shit done, but have it sound epic and unique. And so we've got to really like be hyper focused now on what do we want. And I always look to the artist. They're the ones in the boat. I'm just kind of steering it the direction they tell me to. We're a punk band, we're a metal band, we're a screamo band, whatever. Like, let's stay on course.
Well, you have also very famously been a very big fan of pre-production, as you mentioned, and getting the songs together before you go into the studio. And I was curious, because you do a lot of songwriting and a lot of co-writes and a lot of things. Was it an easy transition for you? Like, an artist comes in and they play a song for you. Was it easy for you to look them in the face from the get-go and be like, yeah, that's cool, but not good enough? Or was that a skill set that you sort of learned was going to be different from artist to artist, and necessary from artist to artist in a different way as you were going along?
Artists are sensitive people. So yeah, I've got to handle the shit with kid gloves, man. It's like, it's not easy when someone comes with a song that has potential, but isn't all there.
Is it easier now though? Now that you're John Feldmann, is it easier now than it was then?
The projects that work best for me are the ones where people respect my history and respect what I've done in my career. And they seem to be more open-minded to suggestions than the ones that maybe don't know what I've, who I am or what I've done. It's like, and it's not like I don't have all the answers, but I do know what my taste is. And when people are coming to me, it's ultimately for my taste to say, this is cool. Absolutely. And this isn't cool. Whether it's a melody, a lyric, a sound, a guitar, whatever it is, like, they're coming to me for that. And like yesterday, I was in the studio with a rapper, and I knew the end of the second verse wasn't as good as the rest of the first verse was. And I'm like, this needs to be better. And look, I didn't grow up on hip hop. I'm not like, I love all kinds of music, and my son has definitely turned me on to, from Juice WRLD to Lil Tecca to everything. So I'm familiar enough now to go, this can be better. And the guy looked at me, and he's like a real dude. This guy, Lil Skies Esther, and he's like, he looked at me and he just kind of like nodded his head. He said, okay, man, let me go back to the drawing board. And it was like, he wrote the whole verse in maybe like 8 minutes. And it was like this epic verse, but the last line I knew he could beat. And then he took the next 45 minutes to write the last 4 words. And it was like, but it ended up being so awesome. But that's the thing about like give and take when it comes to the creative process. It's like, we've got to trust each other. I've got to trust he knows what's best for him. He's the artist, but he's going to trust me as an outsider to say, you can do better, or we can do better, or here's a chorus idea. What do you think of this? and have him say, well, I like the first two lines, but let me rewrite the second two. That sort of give and take.
When you're working, or when you were working on a record that ultimately became epic or huge in the popular zeitgeist, was there an awareness of that? Like the Good Charlotte record, the first Good Charlotte record, did you know kind of when it was done and you listen back, you're like, this is going to be huge? Or were you like, this could go either way?
It is such a great question. I feel like this day more, this time, this day and age more than ever, like there's a celebrity aspect to like what artists are going to make it. Like if you've already got momentum, you've got a huge internet imprint, footprint, and people know who you are already. It's so much easier to push the epic song. The unknown artist, it's so much harder for an unknown artist these days than it was back then. It's like, look, I mean, Good Charlotte had their first album before I worked with them. They had made their first album, and I'd seen them, like they were opening for MXPX at the Palace, and there was already like a momentum to the band. Like people were, I'd say 30% of the people at the show at the Palace were there to see Good Charlotte. It was like there was already something happening. So by the time they had Eric Valentine produce album 2 and we co-wrote the anthem, it was like there was an upswell that was happening. And I knew that we were tapped into something bigger than they were at the moment. I knew they were going to become bigger, which is, part of the attraction of like wanting to work with an artist,
Sure.
knowing that they're on the upward trajectory. And the anthem was like one of those songs that had, there's 808s and the kind of like that loop in it. And there was definitely like a hip hop element to that song that didn't really exist in pop punk. There weren't a lot of like hybrids in that movement. I mean, the rap rock thing had happened with Run DMC and Aerosmith, but it's like Good Charlotte were really ahead of the game. Benji really kind of pushed Joel to do that kind of Jay-Z, this is the anthem, throw all your hands up kind of moment, which is iconic to this day. The song still stands up.
Oh yeah. So there's a tinge, like you kind of know you get a feeling, I would think, at your level of the game experience wise, where you're like, this could work. Obviously there's a lot of variables, there's a lot of factors. Nobody ever really knows, but you've got a good feeling about something. Conversely, when something is done and you listen to it, do you ever go, oh man, maybe we missed the mark. Maybe we need to go back in and give this another shot.
Yeah, that happens. That happens less frequently now because I definitely have an agenda. My agenda is to, like you said, pre-production. I have an acoustic guitar, the band or the artist, we're just sitting in a room and we're singing the song back and forth to each other. We're kind of like, does this work? Like John Lennon and Paul McCartney did. I mean, the OGs of songwriting, the songwriting kings of all time, McCartney and Lennon, they would just sit there back to back with the acoustic guitar and say, what do you got? Well, I got this. What do you got? And like just keep pushing each other to write a better song. And that's the most important thing in that process. And if we get that part right, there really isn't a lot of tweaking. A lot of times an artist will sing a lot and their voice will go. And so they'll have to come back and retrack stuff. And at that point, maybe we'll tweak, a couple lyrics here and there, like a different melody. But 90% of the time, we spend enough time in pre-production writing the song that the other stuff just takes care of itself. It's like when you have a concept to a song, the song writes itself. That's the great thing. Like yesterday, we were talking about, the idea of addiction and the monster in me. And so we had this concept of the monster in me, and it just kind of wrote itself. It's just amazing how that happens when you've got something, really concrete to write about.
So do you look at yourself from the writing process with an artist or a band? Do you take the role in your mind of more of a coach or more of a participant? Are you like, you want to be in there and be the Lennon or the McCartney, or are you Sir George Martin saying, well, maybe not, maybe, or is it different from artist to artist?
It is different from artist to artist. Yeah, I just worked with that band Weathers, and they just wanted me to produce. So I was definitely more of a coach. And when it comes to tracking vocals and tracking drums, I'm definitely like a coach and a hype man. I mean, if they do a good job, I always give them a round of applause. If they don't get the applause. It's like I always try and hype them up when I'm in the studio because I got a little bit of energy. I'm usually pretty much ready to go, and I feel like I'm a pretty good hype man when it comes to that. But I mean, most of the big records I've done the last couple of years, like, Paralyzed by Sueco and Bite Me with Avril, like those kind of, gold and platinum records I've made. I am the writer in the room, and, Paralyzed was my concept. We actually did a breathwork meditation where Sueco and I did, and it came to me in my mind. I'm like, what if we sang this, had a melody and a concept for the chorus? And he loved it. He just he just wrote all the verses and finished up the chorus with me.
Wow.
And it was like the song just kind of came out. But yeah, most artists these days come to me to collaborate. They're not coming for me to just produce.
Yeah, and again, you have that track record. I mean, Duck, Here Comes Some More Love. I mean, you are known in our industry as being one of those guys that can take a song from, hey, I have a song idea, to this is the song and it's now ready and finished and ready for radio or stream. I mean, there are a lot of producers that don't necessarily have that skill set. So I think that's incredibly attractive. And to your point, your track record being predominantly based in genres that are guitar driven, I was going to ask, if you're being honest as a producer, you don't have to be, but if you're being honest as a producer, who are you the hardest on in the studio? Drummers, bass players, guitar players, or vocalists? Who's the one where you're like, we got to get this a little bit more tight or a little bit more right?
I'm always hardest on myself. I mean, I'm my own worst critic, because I feel like if the song doesn't connect, or if the band doesn't succeed the way I feel like they should, it's on me. It's on me for not coming up with a song. It's on me for not delivering the material, which is unfair to me, because timing, it's like, I wrote this song New Perspective with Brendan from Panic at the Disco that had this huge TikTok moment 3 months ago. And it's become like, their third or fourth biggest streaming song because of this video. And at the time, it was in Jennifer's Body in the movie, and it did okay. It never really made it to the radio, but now it's got this moment. And it's like, timing is everything. And sometimes a song's time to shine is much later. Like the song was written in 2008. So you never know. That's the thing, is sometimes it's unfair to me to say, we didn't blow up on this song, but you never know. It could be years later that we have a moment. That's the great thing about music. But I mean, besides myself, it's always the drummer. If the drummer can't play to a click,
right?
Like, I mean, there were moments where, I had like a staff of, it was pretty much Dean Butterworth and Josh Freese. Those are my two guys. And, Dean's now the drummer for Good Charlotte, who I helped get in that band, which was, an honor. And obviously Josh Freese, who needs no introduction. I mean, the guy is he's just one of those guys that just knows what the song needs. He'll hear it, he'll listen to it twice and play it start to finish. And if I feel like getting harassed, I'll make him do it again. But usually the first take, he'll get it. But like, for instance, the drummer Goldfinger could never swing. Like if there was like a song called Counting the Days or King for a Day that had he would always straighten it out and just kind of, I'd be like, Joe, you got to keep the shuffle throughout the whole song. It doesn't straighten out. And so I'd have to have, Josh would come in and, at the beginning, we tried to kind of hide it from him because he was such a sensitive guy. But in the end, he kind of knew that like he just couldn't do that thing. And Josh would come in and do it. There's a couple other records I made. I remember one time, I won't mention names, but I was living on Mulholland, and the drummer of the band, when I told him, I'm like, dude, you can't. Obviously, after 2 or 3 hours of working on a 2 or 3 minute song, you're like, dude, we've got to do something different. I remember him going out in the street at 2 a.m. and just laying there and just say, run me over, just kill me. He was so upset. He was so upset. Oh, but I had Dean come in and finish it. So, I can be the dream crusher, and that's not what I want to be. But ultimately, the song is the most important thing. And if you're listening to how bad the drums are and not how great the vocal performance is, I'm doing something wrong.
So you bring up another great point. So as your production star is on the rise, you're still a very viable and valuable member of Goldfinger, and that band is still doing its thing. Was it ever difficult for the other guys in the band to see you sort of I don't want to say rise without them, but I have to say it, rise in an area where they weren't, where you're kind of becoming this guy, and you're still involved. The band is still going on and it's doing, but you're kind of like and this is a horrible analogy for all the rock people. I'm going to use it anyway, just because I know it's going to bother you. You become the Gwen Stefani of the band a little bit. You're kind of pushed out front a little bit. Was that a weird transition for you and them, or was it easier because you guys are just buds?
Think in the history of humans, as a human, has a human grown into like a 52-year-old body the way that Gwen Stefani has, by the way. I don't think there's any more attractive human that has stayed attractive as long as, she's so sweet and so nice.
Correct.
And so beautiful. And, other than my wife, of course.
Of course.
And, but yeah, I'll take that. I'll take that analogy, dude. I'll take it any day. And my band guys, I can be intimidating, and obviously they've got an agenda. They want to keep the band going. And so they don't want to piss me off enough to say, what are you doing, bro? And they can see that, like, I've got these, gold and platinum plaques on my wall. And every time you turn on K-Rock, it's Story of the Year, the Used, and they know what's going on, and they can see the success that I'm having. And I think that probably my gut tells me I've never really had a heart-to-heart with anyone in my band about this, but they probably feel slightly responsible, only because when Goldfinger was, we're probably bigger than we've ever been now because we don't tour a lot, but when we were at the peak of like when pop punk was really happening, end of the 90s and beginning of 2000s, I would take out Story of the Year and have them open for us. So we had a built-in audience of 3,000 kids coming to see us, and they'd see this unknown band open for us. It was so good live that they'd make a bunch of new fans. Same with the Used. We took the Used out on their first tour ever. We took Story of the Year on the first tour ever. Same with Mest and Showoff. Like all these bands we took on the road. And I'm sure the guys in my band feel some sort of ownership to their success because, I kind of made them take them on tour.
Yeah. But you feel it's obviously never been an issue to the point where it's been an issue is I guess what I'm getting at. Here's what would seem to be from our perspective as the fans' perspective. Here's what I would like to call a group of grown-ass adults making grown-ass adult decisions to just be professionals and have fun and enjoy the life they've been given, as opposed to what could have been a catastrophic, to your point, like you said, a bickering, well, I said, you said, she said, and I find that to be incredibly encouraging. It's it's a very cool, not that you guys claim to be role models, but it's a great example to set for supporting one another and for all being a part of the same thing in different capacities. Because like you said, it takes a village. It's everybody. Everybody's got their contribution to this thing we call music. And one of the hardest things to do is learn to be comfortable with whatever your contribution ends up being. Sometimes it's not what you thought it would be. Sometimes it's more than you could have ever dreamed. But in either instance, it's those relationships that generally tend to suffer when success happens. Have you found that to be, you've been in and around so many bands that came from nothing and became everything, and you've seen all the sides of the industry. Have you noticed a trend for the relationships to be the first to go when things get good or bad?
Yeah, there's a reason that Coldplay have stayed the same four guys, and same with, for the most part, Red Hot Chili Peppers and U2. They split publishing equally. Everything is split equally, even though there's a clear kind of one or two writers in the band. They still split everything equally. So there's not one guy in the mansion on the mountain and the other guys are in the apartment down in Echo Park or whatever. It's not like that. It's with the big bands, how they kind of stay together. But look, I am so grateful for the guys that I get to play with. Now Goldfinger's kind of a super group of all these pop punk superstars. But, even when I think about everyone that I've played with, I have a good relationship with everyone that's ever been in my band. And I've seen bands that, there are members sleeping with other members' wives, and there's, people smoking crack. And like, I've seen the worst of the worst in human-like behavior. And when it comes to Goldfinger, like nothing's been that way. And there was a moment in time where I did not feel as grateful as I do today that, our drummer flipped. It's always the drummer, dude, by the way. Yeah. Always the fucking drummer. He picked Conan O'Brien up and flipped him over his head and almost broke his neck when we played his show live, and literally almost broke the guy's neck. The guy's 6'7", and our drummer thought he could pick him up over his shoulders. And we were banned from national TV. And it was like, I was not feeling so grateful to have him in the band, back then. And then, we play punk music, and there was a lot of fights, a lot of infighting, a lot of physical fights between our guitar player and drummer that would happen after shows. They'd have black eyes the next day. And it was really, really challenging when people are getting in physical fights and you're around like, am I going to get beat up tonight? And our drummer again beat up a cop one night. And he had to go to jail. It was, and that's the thing. But your brothers, you're in there. And at the time, there's like the beginning, the first 4 albums, touring cycle, were the first, the same dudes in it. And then we kind of splintered off when things got really bad, but we all kind of came back together. We've all made amends to each other. That's the thing about growing up, right?
Yeah, totally. Was there a moment though, did you guys have any idea that you were going to ultimately make 99 Red Balloons more identifiable as your song than the original artists? Or did that come as a happy surprise?
Oh, the thorn in my side.
I know, right? That's
the cover song. The fucking cover song.
That one. And that's the curse. You know it because you're in the industry. You know what it's like when an artist becomes famous for the cover song, even though they've had a huge body of work before and a huge body of work after zillions and millions of fans. The one thing everyone always wants to talk about is the cover song. Well, and it's your own goddamn fault. Had you sucked it up and not done it so well, maybe it would have gone away. But you guys, you made it yours again, and unfortunately, now it's a part of your legacy forever. So deal with it.
It is bittersweet. I'm very grateful that the song has become what it became. And we made a covers record in between album 2 and 3, and that song was made for the covers record. But I think collectively, the label, us, management, all pointed to it and said, this is too good to put on an EP that no one's really ever going to hear. So we saved it for Stomping Ground.
And then it was in that movie, right? It was in Not Another Teen movie, which was huge.
It was in that. And it might have been in Euro Trip as well, I think. And it just became this big moment. But I'm so grateful that Superman is our biggest song.
Yes.
It's our biggest streamer. It's our most successful song to this day, which I wrote 100% of that song. And Here and Here Better is our third most popular song, which is 100% written by me. And so I can't be that bitter or ungrateful that a cover song. And it's like, it's so good live. And the song is so good. When I hear the Nina version, the original, I still get goosebumps. I mean, it's such a well-written song.
It was very ahead of its time.
Just singing about the Berlin Wall and about like growing up with war around them, which I didn't have that experience growing up in California, but she did. And so it's like I channeled this energy through these amazing lyrics that she wrote, and I mean, look, we end with that song. I mean, it's hard to play that song and play something after it because that riff is so hard.
Yeah.
And the song just has this big jumping moment. It's like, I try because it's like, my gratitude list and my resentment list are the same fucking list, depending on my attitude. Like this goddamn song that people think is mine, that I have to tell them I didn't write, or this amazing song that goes off so hard live that people come to see us for. Which one do I want to be? Do I want to be grateful for it or resentful for it? I choose to be grateful.
Preach. Okay, so this is the $55,000 question. I don't know if you've ever been asked this, so I'm going to ask it, and if you don't want to answer it, we'll edit this out. This is about Ashlee Simpson. I was just going to ask, were you watching Saturday Night Live the night that it all happened?
I wasn't watching Saturday Night Live, but I've seen the footage, and it's such a shame that, I mean, I'm sure most pop artists use track.
Yeah, well, that's the thing.
Even this day, they probably use track more than they did back then. And it's like for her to be so banished from a musical career because she used track and her drummer hit the wrong button. It's like, I felt so bad for her. And I worked with her again years later, and it had affected her so much. It like literally changed her personality. And
For
I
me,
just I
the big my takeaway from that was how many people were. I think that's still a great sounding record. So again, when that Pieces of Me record, from a rock to pop transition, I think there's so many elements to that record that were unique at the time that ultimately became very common through other records like it afterwards. I always felt like people judging that, and like you, I was like, well, who's stupid enough to think everyone gets on live television and sings? I mean, have you never seen Top of the Pops? Have you never seen, I mean, American Bandstand? Like, this is part of our culture. People, who gives a shit? I mean, but it for whatever reason, whatever was in the zeitgeist at that time, they made her the enemy of all things that were apparently pure and everything else. And I always felt bad for her, but I feel like the biggest tragedy is some great songs and some amazing production on that record. So I was just curious if you watched it in real time or if you found out afterwards and you were like, oh man, it's like, oh boy.
I know it's so tough. The dance, the whole thing was so,
Yeah.
it was goofy. And I still feel, I mean, I'm sure she must feel much worse than me, but I feel bad for her to this day. It's tough, but it's like, look at Milli Vanilli had the same thing, and one of the guys ended his life because it was so challenging.
Yeah, but based on where our industry is now, they should posthumously give them the Grammy back and thank them for inventing an entirely new genre of this is how everybody performs live. They were innovators at this point in time. The entire Academy needs to suck it up and do the right thing and be like, oh, we were sorry. You guys were just 20 years ahead of your time. Unbelievable.
Yeah. I don't know.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. I had,
no. Go ahead.
You had brought up, so the last thing I wanted to talk about, because this was, and you already transitioned into it nicely at the very beginning, was you have this transitional moment. And obviously I don't think most people realize what was going on in your personal life at the time, but you have this moment with 5 Seconds of Summer that sort of starts the second chapter of what I like to call the John Feldmann dynasty of like, okay, well, now he was doing this and he did all that could possibly be done with that. And then you're like, I haven't heard from John Feldmann in a while. And then out of the blue comes this crazy otherworldly, takes over the world more than anyone could have ever anticipated or seen situation. And I'm like, that sounds like, is it? And you go and you check, oh, John's involved with that. And you're like, okay, well, now we're on this different trajectory. How do you go from being the guy that's working with the Used and Atreyu and Black Veil Brides to, hey man, here's these guys that are real young and good looking and are going to kind of be a pseudo boy band. Let's get John involved. How does that work?
A friend of mine, I was in London playing shows with Goldfinger, and a friend of mine just told me about this band that were looking to get a record deal, that were rehearsing in London. And I just showed up at their rehearsal space. It was right down the street from where I was staying, and I just showed up, and it just ended up being 5 Seconds of Summer, and we just connected. And they were massive fans of the Used, and they were just the Used were much bigger in Australia than anywhere else, and they were big here. Wow. But they were like superstars in Australia. So, and they were so they were just mentioning all the bands, like All Time Low and Good Charlotte. And I literally called Benji from the, and they said, dude, you got to talk to these kids. And I put him on the phone with Benji and with Alex from All Time Low, just introduced him to all of the band, to all of these people that they grew up on and they were like super fans of. And they were so energetic and had so much positivity, and they still do to this day. Like they like live on such a like high vibes. It's really hard. You can't really be negative around them. It's just, they're like a negativity push off. It's crazy. And I just fell in love with the boys. I love the music, and and we started writing songs together, and it just clicked. It was like, just being back in the studio with any other band that I may have worked with. Everyone in the band was just, they all sang and they could all play their instruments. It was easy. And those are the best projects, man. When I think about the ones that just, the overthinkers, they want to recut their vocals like 7-8 days, after the song's finished, and just redo. Like, these guys were just like, they know that, songs are a moment in time that we capture, and they need to be put out really close to when you capture that moment of magic. If you wait forever, it's like the song doesn't mean the same thing. If you're writing 200 songs for a project, song one typically doesn't make it. It's always the ones that come at the end. So I try and write and release the music. And if it doesn't connect, there's always another song to come. It doesn't need to be overthought. If there's no big viral moment on TikTok, if there's no, big Instagram, kind of liked moment, it's like there's always going to be another song. And nobody, this is the truth, nobody can make a viral moment happen. Nobody, not anybody. It's like those things just happen, and they've got a life of their own. It's like you can't pay enough money for those things to happen. It could be someone eating a fucking sandwich, or it could be the next Let It Be. But you don't know when that moment's going to happen. So you just got to keep putting out music until something connects.
When you write, or when you're talking about writing with artists like 5 Seconds of Summer, or any artist really, do you have a standard in your mind where you say, okay, we're here, we're ready to start recording or ready to start producing? Is there do you have a criteria you click off on, okay, I feel like this song might be done, now we can record it? Or do you just get a certain amount of the way and be like, okay, we're close, let's see what happens when we record?
I have a 10-minute rule. If we're spending more than 10 minutes on a lyric and if we're like caught on one line in a verse for longer than 10 minutes, I move on to the bridge, or I'll move on to the chorus. So it's like, if I've spent, and we're sitting there with a finished song longer than 10 minutes over analyzing and picking it apart, I usually try and push the singer into the studio after I've laid down, some kind of guide guitar or I use Easy Drummer on fucking Superior Drummer on everything. It's like, that's how I program everything, starting with that. And it's like, I've got all my own drum sound. It's like having, Eric from House of Protection did all the drum, all the samples for our tune track shit. And I'll have like a drum thing, a guitar thing, and then I'll put the singer in there as a demo to say, all right. And most of the time, the demo vocals end up being the main vocals.
Wow. Are you precious about gear, or will you just kind of go with whatever's going to work?
I'm precious about microphones. Like, Avril sounds really good on my Manley, the cardioid mic. And Ian sounds really good on the C800. And most like Mark Hoppus sounds great on the Telefunken 251. So I'm really precious about that. But I did so many tests with like my engineers back in the day. Like, we'd have literally 6 or 7 different engineers blindfolded saying, okay, here's an API preamp, here's a need preamp. We would just go through, I'd rent like 10 different preamps. And in the end, it's like, by the time everything's EQ'd and compressed and mixed, it's like I'm not really doing symphonic or acoustic music. I'm doing rock music. And so the nuances between preamps, I've really not been able to notice that much of a difference when the final product is there. And so I'm not a fanatic about preamps, but I've got the Dragon, that Stephen Slate Dragon, which is his modded out version of an 1176, which has like analog distortion in it, and it's an incredible compressor. And I use that on all my vocals. I could do so many different things with it that I just love it on vocals. Drums, I'm a stickler to, it's like Travis brings in, his DW kits when we recorded Travis here, or sometimes he'll use my SJC kit, which I've got set up at all times. I've got my drum kit set up with all, kind of my mics. I've got the little green bullet mic for the butt mic for the distortion. I've got everything set up the way it is. So, I'm a stickler, but I'm more about capturing the energy. Like, whenever the song is written, that energy to me is so important to capture the life of the song immediately. And if we've written it, and I'm like, let's go try out 6 different microphones for your vocals, it's like sometimes you kill the momentum, and I don't want to kill the momentum.
Is there any type of project that you'd say no to?
Look, rock and alternative is in my bones, and so it's really easy. But I would have never thought I was going to be producing rap records, and I'm producing rap records. So it's like, I don't know. I don't know. And it's like, there's so many bands that have had these kind of comeback moments the last couple of years that, when I was coming up, like what we talked about early in this conversation, it was like, if you weren't punk, then you weren't allowed in the scene. You know what I mean? If you weren't like a punk band, and it's like, bands like Creed and Nickelback were definitely scoffed at. And now it's like, they've got all these backstories, and you listen to it, you go, Photographs is a fucking great song, no matter how you break it down.
Hands down. Yeah, period.
And it's like, so my attitude about this has definitely changed. And who am I to judge anyone that makes it in the music business? My hat's off. It is so fucking hard to make it in the music business. So hard and so competitive. So many people want to take the same project you're getting hired for. So many. And it's like, whenever I see any artist that makes it, I'm like, fuck yeah. We can still do this. Like, the story of Chapel Roan, it's like, it's incredible what she's done.
Yeah.
Incredible.
So I kind of want to wind this down with, I think there's a component of your story that's pretty, I think it presents itself through the way you present yourself as well as your work. And you probably already know that it's, you made a very, very cool point about, you made the decision to frame your life, your experiences, your work, your family, and everything else a particular way. You said to yourself, I could choose this or I could choose that. And I know that type of power has to be earned. It doesn't just come to us, or we'd all just do that naturally. We have to learn through so many different experiences. So as undoubtedly, there's a number of young people out there, older people, anyone listening to this that are already inspired by you and your work and your journey. What's that one piece of advice that you wish you'd have got from your future self when you were first starting out, whether you were at the top, the bottom, the middle, no matter where you've been, that one piece where you're like, okay, that might have helped, but it didn't, and that's how I got here anyway?
Yeah, there's two things that come to mind. I mean, one, my friend Milton Dykes, who passed away of Parkinson's disease, used to always say, the only handicap is a bad attitude. And that's it. This guy would, shake violently from Parkinson's, and he'd say, the only handicap is a bad attitude. Wow. And it's like, what can I do to change my attitude? And that's up to me, man. It's like, the two things are, changing my attitude, which for me means, like I said, it's a cold plunge, it's a workout, it's prayer and meditation. I don't know what that is for you. It may be, just eating healthy or taking hikes, or I don't know what it is for you. And the other thing is just be kind. Like, I was like any kid, I was like early 20s when I started Goldfinger. When things started to take off, I was super judgmental, and I'd make fun of other bands. I was just, a kid, like trying to find my way. I wish I would have been nicer to other musicians, rather than be competitive and to think, like, I used to think they're going to take my slot on this festival if I'm nice to them or if I'm kind. But that's not how it works. There's enough space for everybody. There's just enough bandwidth for everybody. I mean, you look at how many artists are on Spotify, and what is like 10,000 songs get uploaded a day or something. It's insane. It's like there's something out there for everybody. And it's not like stay in your lane, because I'm not one of those guys that's like, I could only do pop punk, because where would I be in my career if that was what I thought? But I know what my superpowers are. I know I'm good with people. I know that I can write a great anthemic chorus, and I try and just bring that positive attitude no matter who I'm working with, and I try and bring that in any session I can.
Last question, and this is for all the dads out there. Are your kids impressed by your work, or are they just like, yeah, no, we get it, Dad. You're a rock star. We understand.
They weren't for the longest time. I mean, they were kind of like annoyed that they had to go to another Goldfinger show. They're like, they don't like punk. And yeah, my daughter crossed over when she turned 15 into a big 5 Seconds of Summer fan. So it's like, now she wears the merch. And so now it's like, I can And when they come to the house, like she's known them for years, but now they come up to the house and they're like, she's like, oh my God, they're here. What do I do? What do I wear? Like she's all like nervous. It's so cute, you know? And my son was really impressed yesterday when I was with Little Skies. He was like, that's like a legit rapper. And my son only listens to hip hop. So he was like, I got him a picture and he was, I mean, he knows that my son definitely knows like I'm cool.
Sure.
My daughter, I'm not sure about.
And you wouldn't have it any other way. You wouldn't, yeah, but you love it. That's the curse of this part of the industry is it doesn't matter how many famous people you know, your family will keep you humble. And I
100%.
love that. All right. I'm going to turn back to these people and say goodbye.
Thank you.
You need to know that we appreciate you, your time, everything you do. We are huge fans and we mean that sincerely. So we love you. If there's anything we can ever do for you, the answer is always yes. The only reason it hasn't happened is because you haven't asked. So thank you for your time. I'm going to tell these folks goodbye and then I'll let you go. Okay,
thank you
folks,
so much.
You heard it here second or third because John's pretty popular and he's done a lot of podcasts, but great stuff, right? I mean, if you're not inspired now, then you never will be. So just quit and go work at McDonald's like I'm about to do right now. So listen, this has been Rick. We appreciate you tuning in. We're grateful that you took some time out for us today. Please make sure you check back next week. There'll be another podcast. We'll have another amazing human being. And you got to keep up with these amazing human beings. You get way more cool points for knowing what's going on with these people than you don't. So check back to the Sound Horizons podcast brought to you by D.R.U.G.S. My name is Rick. I hope you have a fantastic week, and I look forward to you hearing me talk to you through various mediums in whichever way you choose to consume this in the future. Have a great day. Bye-bye.